If you're a fan of the Alien franchise, then you have to go see Alien Romulus. Let me just go out on a limb here and say that this is probably one of my most anticipated films of 2024. It was right up there with Longlegs and Maxine. Those are probably my top three for this year for most anticipated movies. So let's just get that out of the way before I start doing this review. During this review of Alien Romulus, I will not go anywhere outside of the plot because I want you to experience this movie for yourself. I will try to do my best to keep everything spoiler free, but if there is going to be some type of spoiler, I will indicate it in the video. But I will do my best to keep everything to a bare minimum. We all know my reviews by this point. I've done a few already. We go over some negatives, we go over some positives, I give you my thoughts on the movie, give you some facts about the movie, and I give you my overall rating about the movie at the end. So let's jump right into this. Alien Romulus, I absolutely enjoyed this movie. It's incredible. Fede Alvarez is directing this movie. He is the same director of The Evil Dead 2013 as well as the Don't Breathe franchise, and I am a big fan of those movies as well. But he does a really good job of capturing the experience of the Alien franchise in this movie to the fullest extent. I think Fede Alvarez does a very good job at capturing inspiration from Ridley Scott in this movie. If you're a fan of the Alien franchise, then you know that anything that has Ridley Scott's name on it or stamped to it as a producer is worth a watch. He has pretty much been the backbone of this franchise. I'm a big fan of the original two movies. The first movie, Alien, was one of its kind. It set a benchmark in cinema history for alien movies. And then James Cameron's Aliens, I really enjoyed that one as well. And this Alien Romulus kind of plays into those movies. It's set between those two movies. So I think Fede did a very good job at capturing inspiration from Ridley Scott and taking the undertones and the cinema and the plots and the story, the narrative. I think he does a very good job at recreating that in this movie. Now, with that being said, I will say there are some movies in this franchise that I do not care for. I'm not the biggest fan of Alien 3. I think it has dark undertones, and I don't think it fits into the storyline well. And I don't like the Alien vs. Predator movies. I think the characterization in those movies are bad. I think the story in those movies are bad. Requiem, you can't even see them like half the movie. And I don't think that they fit good into this universe of movies. So that's just my opinion. Doesn't have to be everybody's opinion. A lot of people like those movies. I'm just not the biggest fan of those three movies in this beloved franchise of Alien. Now let's jump into the plot of this movie. The plot of this movie stars Kaylee Spaley and David Johnson. Kaylee Spaley plays Rain, and David Johnson plays Andy, who is probably my favorite character in this movie. I think they both play very good characters throughout this movie, but Andy definitely takes it from me. Andy is a synthetic android, so he is programmed to be Rain's brother, and it's a gift from her dad whenever he died, and he was reprogrammed to tell dad jokes, and he's set to protect her, and that's kind of where this movie starts out, and she has hit her hours and she's able to get off the planet that she's on, but then they increase those hours and then they tell her that she cannot leave for another 6 years. And we find out that the planet that she is on is where she was born, and she was before her parents died. She was born there, and the planet that she's on is a colonized planet run by Weyland, who are also the corporation in charge of trying to take over the universe of Alien. So that's kind of like where this fits in. But afterwards, she and her friends try to come up with this idea to go up to this ship that comes over the radar, and it has these cryopods and cryosleep fuel on it, and they want to get to it so they can basically put themselves to sleep and then blast out to the nearest planet. That way they don't have to be on their home planet anymore. And there's a group of 5 friends. You have Rain, you have Andy, you have Tyler, you have Kay, and then you have Bjorn. Out of those characters, I think they all do very well in this movie. They all play their part very well. There's one character out of those five I didn't necessarily care for through the movie, and it's Bjorn, and he plays like this asshole character that just kind of disses everybody the whole movie and kind of tells people that they're POSs and makes them feel bad. He really doesn't like Andy because his father was killed by a robot, so he takes a lot of aggression out on Andy the whole movie. I don't know, that just didn't fit well for me, because for me, during like a real life scenario, that group of friends would probably tell that person to fuck off. And in this movie, they just kind of deal with it. And of course, whenever they get up to that spacecraft in the sky, that's lurking right outside of their atmosphere, which we'll come back to a little bit later on, because I got some negatives on that toward the end of this. But it's flying right outside their atmosphere. Once they get there, of course, they're not alone. There's, you know, the face huggers and these aliens and things on that spacecraft. But that's kind of where this plot goes, and that's kind of where I'm going to stop, because I don't want to get into too much detail on that. So from this point, we'll stop talking about the movie, and we'll go on to my positives and my negatives and some of the facts about the movie. Now, are there any movies that I think you need to watch before you watch this movie from the rest of the franchise? I don't know. I would say no. This is a good standalone movie, but if you are interested in the Alien franchise, you haven't watched many of them before, I would say definitely watch the first two, and then anything that has Ridley's name on it, Ridley Scott's name on it, because those are really the direct inspiration for this movie. It's really directed toward the fans of this franchise, and I enjoy that. And the movie takes place, Alien Romulus takes place in between Alien and Aliens. So that would help you understand a little bit if you haven't ever watched anything about this franchise before. But I don't think you necessarily need to watch any of them to understand what's going on. One last thing I do want to say before we go into my positives and negatives is that the last half hour of this movie is either going to make or break you for your experience with the film itself. So the last half hour will probably either make you love this movie or make you hate this movie. And for me, I really enjoyed what they did. I just wish they would have tweaked it a little bit, because I think that it would have set pace for like a better ending. But outside of that, I think that if you're not a fan of like the original fan-made movies, then you probably will not like the direction that the end of this movie goes. All right, so without further ado, let's get into my positives. So my positives for this movie, my first one, is that this film is brilliant in every aspect. If you're a fan of the original Alien movies, then you will adore this movie. Alien Romulus really takes the undertones from Ridley Scott's movies and brings them full-fledged into like the New Age cinema. It does tie into the first two movies, and it does also hint in little ways for like Alien Covenant and Prometheus, kind of like bridging the gap. But I really enjoyed how Fede Alvarez did that whenever he was directing, how he wanted to put those things in to try and bridge the gap between the first two movies and the last two movies. So that's my first positive. I think it's very well done. My second positive, I think the cinematography in this movie is outstanding. There is nothing in this movie that you will not enjoy if you like sci-fi movies, and if you are a fan of the Alien or Predator movies. The cinematography is so good. It's got practical effects, it's got CGI, it has great narrative, it has a lot of things going for it. I'm a fan of practical effects. I will always be a fan of practical effects. There's nothing that I think CGI can do that practical effects cannot do better. Yes, CGI helps with like expenses and things of that nature, but in this movie, Fede Alvarez really kills it with the practical effects, and you'll see that with like the face huggers and some of the ambiance that goes on in the movies and the spacecrafts themselves. There's a lot of practical effects that go into play here. Now, my third positive, I think the characterization in this movie is incredible. There are some characters I don't care for in this movie, but the two main characters in this movie really, really kill it. They do a really good job. So Kaylee Spaley and David Johnson. Kaylee Spaley plays Rain, and David Johnson plays Andy, and they do a fantastic job throughout the movie of portraying their characters. Kaylee Spaley probably does as good as a final girl in this movie as the original movies did with Sigourney Weaver. And I think David Johnson fits the role very well as a synthetic robot who's trying to understand his emotions and bridge the gap between humanity and synthetic. I think he does a good job at that, as well as they both have a very good storyline plot of trying to get off their planet and Andy trying to protect Rain. It really fits well together. My fourth positive, I mean, I got a lot of positives in this movie, but my fourth positive is that I think the story arc fits incredibly well within the Alien franchise and really helps bridge that gap between the original two movies and the last two movies, Alien Covenant and Prometheus. So I think it does a fantastic job of making you understand like what happens in between that time period and how the Weyland Corporation is trying to take over the universe and their plot directive behind it. So that's a really big positive for me because some of these movies are kind of all over the place with their story arc and you don't know what's going on with where. But I think Fede Alvarez does a very good job at bridging that gap in this movie. All right, so let's get into my negatives. So I only have two negatives, and that's pretty good. But I think that one of the big negatives for me, you remember how earlier I said I was going to hint at the spaceship coming into the atmosphere, and I'm going to. So like that, the ship that comes into the atmosphere of Rain's home planet is a Weyland-run ship. Okay, it's a Weyland Corporation ship. So why didn't the Weyland Corporation just fly somebody out into that atmosphere to destroy the ship or bring the ship back before all this happened? Okay, that's not explained in this movie, and I think that's a big gap for the story arc. Because if you're this big corporation trying to take over the universe, and there's this very predominant ship flying into an atmosphere of a civilized, colony, why didn't you fly somebody out there to take the ship back? All right, so now for my last negative. It's a small one. I think that the characters clash just a little bit. It's mainly the character of Bjorn. Like I said earlier, kind of hinted at it. But he plays this asshole character in the movie, which, really goes off on everybody, makes everybody feel like shit, treats everybody like crap, really treats Andy really bad throughout the movie. And like I stated earlier, I think that in a real life scenario, a group of friends wouldn't deal with that. They would shut him down or just tell him to fuck off and tell him to, leave him out in the dirt or whatever. I don't think a real group of friends would deal with that in real life. So that's kind of like where that goes for me. I don't think that the characters are bad. I think he plays a good asshole, but it doesn't fit well with the other group of characters. But, in that scenario, you typically get the comeuppance whenever that character gets what's coming to them. And I will say in this movie, it's pretty cool. So I'm not going to hint at what happens or how it happens, but it is a really cool scene. So you do have that going for you later on. All right, so overall, Alien Romulus, how do I feel about it? I think it's a fantastic film. I think Fede Alvarez did a fantastic job at directing this movie, taking inspiration from Ridley Scott, merging the gap between all the movies, and making a better understanding for this franchise. So I really enjoyed it. I had a really good experience. I think you should go out and see it. I think it's well worth the time spent in the theater to go see it, especially in IMAX. It gives you that full experience. But overall, I would give it a 4.7 out of 5, and you should definitely go and see this movie. All right, folks, that's it for this one. If you enjoyed my review of Alien Romulus, check out my other reviews down in the description below. I also make short videos about true crime and about horror, so check those out also. I really appreciate you guys so much. Thank you guys for everything that you do. And remember, check under your beds and stay safe out there.